Hello, my name is Dietmar Doerschlag with Valiantys. Thank you so very much for joining me on this video. In this video, I want to talk about a topic that is very near and dear to me as I encounter it in my work with many clients all the time. And that is the topic of priorities and specifically how you can use Jira Automation to automatically calculate priority values from both urgency and impact values. So let's dive in. Now, let's start with a definition of priority. Priority in IT service management is a very key concept and it's really used all the time. Basically, priority is a mechanism that we use to decide the order in which incidents should be addressed. Of course, priority also comes into play with respect to service request fulfillment. And priority combines really two elements. It combines impact and urgency. And I'm going to talk about those two topics a little bit more later. Urgency and impact really determine priority in a single value, and the priority value then guides the teams through the response and the resource allocation in resolving incidents and fulfilling service requests. Now, priority determines the sequence and the speed of a response to incidents, problems, changes, and as I said, also service fulfillment requests. And really properly setting priorities ensure that the most critical and time-sensitive issues are addressed first. And of course, it's all about preventing business disruption. So let's talk about how this works in Jira. So here we have a Jira Service Management project. I call it the Valiantys ITSM project. And we go into project settings and we look at summary. We see the priority scheme that is attached to that project. Now this is the default priority scheme. Let's look at this scheme a little bit more. This scheme that I'm using in this video has those levels of priority: critical, highest, high, medium, low, lowest, and informational. And there is, of course, always, as is the case in most schemes in Jira, the possibility, the option to set one of those values to be the default, which in my case is a medium priority. Now, it is, of course, possible to change that scheme. If you click on Edit, you can attach additional priorities to that scheme. I have seen clients that have 12 levels of priority. That is a lot. I suggest to really think this through. Make sure that you don't make it too complicated. In my case, to go from critical to lowest seems about right. If you want to add priorities, you would click down here into priorities. And here you can, of course, define additional priorities. Each priority has a color attached to it. And then, of course, priorities live in priority schemes, and the priority scheme is attached to the project. Now, what I see very often with my clients is that they build forms, intake forms for both incidents and, let's say, service request fulfillments that only have the priority field on the form. So in this case, we see an incident intake form, which of course the client, the customer fills out from the portal. And here we have a priority field and only a priority field. Now the tendency, of course, is that customers, when they fill out that form, they would probably select a rather high priority because, of course, the issue is very near and dear to them. So there is a human tendency, I believe, to then select a higher priority, as should necessarily be the case. And this is why I'm advocating to use a different intake form where we don't even expose the priority field to the customer. Rather, we're asking them to tell us what the urgency is and what the impact is. Now, if we look at this form, when they come into submitting that form, they're telling us what the urgency is, right? And for that user, of course, the urgency could be very, very critical or high or medium or low. But then we do not only look at the urgency, we look at the impact. And the impact is really important. The impact could be from, well, this only affects a single user to maybe it affects an entire team. It could be Significant large, meaning maybe an entire office location, something like that. And of course, the largest by far impact is if it impacts everyone in the company. Now, what we want to do is we want upon the users not telling us what the priority is, but rather telling us what the urgency and the impact is. We want to use those two values to then calculate the priority to ensure the most appropriate service response. Now, how do we do that? Now, this is where Jira Automation comes in. Now, before I show you how this works with automation, let's again look at those two core components that we will be using in the automation: urgency and impact. Urgency refers to how quickly an incident should be resolved or a service to prevent significant business impact. It measures the time sensitivity of the issue, essentially how fast action must be taken before the incident causes serious disruption. Impact, on the other hand, refers to the extent of the damage or the disruption. Again, as I said, single user, isolated to a single person or company-wide. It measures how big the problem is in terms of the number of users, services, or business processes. So now we will use Jira Automation, which is a really cool set of features in Jira to automatically calculate the priority. Now, what is Jira Automation in case you have not used it or you're fairly new to it? It's a no-code feature in Jira that lets teams streamline repetitive tasks, processes, and workflows by creating rules made of triggers, conditions, and actions. So here we have a trigger. In this case, the automation that I'm going to show you, we will use a trigger when the issue is created. That's when the automation should run. And the condition is, well, let's say we will run this automation only on incidents or only on bugs in a particular project. And the action that should be taken in my case is it should calculate a priority. Now here is a matrix that I put together: urgency and impact. And impact goes from single user to company-wide, and urgency goes from low to critical. And depending on the combination of urgency and impact, I let Jira Automation then calculate those priority values. So for example, if a significant large impact occurs for a single user only, then the priority should obviously be very different compared to many users being affected by this, right? So we are using essentially impact and urgency values to automatically calculate the priority. So let's try this out with a few examples. Now here I have a form ready to go. In this form, yes, we do not expose the priority field on the form. We only expose the urgency and impact. And in this case, I'm simulating a scenario where the urgency is high, right? So the user that reports this in and says, well, for me as a user, there's a high urgency to this. But then they tell us that the impact is only for them. It's localized, a single user. So according to the matrix that I put together, the priority should be calculated as medium, right? Because it only affects a single user. So let's submit this form and see what it does. Now I created an incident with incident number 32. So let's look at this incident, open that incident up. And as we see, the urgency was properly calculated to be medium. So the automation ran, and based on the urgency and impact value, the priority was properly calculated to be medium. And we see this on the priority matrix where a single user with a high priority calculates with a high impact or urgency rather, should calculate a medium priority. So the automation ran successful. Now let's try this out with a different issue. In this case, we have a low impact, but it's a company-wide problem, right? So let's say the example would be that there's a latency in a network logon. Well, they can still log on. So a user reports this issue in and says, well, this is low urgency. I can still log in. It just took me quite some time to log in, but it affects everyone in the company. So in this case, we should be calculating a high priority. So I'm submitting this issue and let's let the automation run kick in. So it is now ITSM 34, bringing up that issue, and we see that the priority is automatically set to high, not the default value from the priority scheme, which is medium, but it properly set an automation of high. And the last issue that I'm simulating is where we have a user who phones in a critical urgency and the impact is significant large. In this case, the priority should be calculated to be highest according to the matrix that I created. So if we look at issue number 36, and it did calculate the priority as highest. So let's look at how, in closing, how the automation actually works. So I'm coming over here and I'm looking at the automation, and we see that this automation, which I called the incident priority matrix, successfully executed for the last number of issues that I created. So let's look at how the rule is written. So in this case, we have a trigger when the work item is created, as soon as I submitted that form. And then I'm running this on a condition where this should only apply to work items equal incidents. And then I have if-else statements. So if the urgency equals low and the impact equals single user localized, then I'm editing the field priority to field lowest. Else, if urgency equals medium, impact equals single user, I'm editing the priority value to be low. And I'm essentially then going through all combos from that priority scheme are indicated in that automation rule, right? So there could be quite a few different combos. Every single combination from that matrix that I showed you is indicated in that automation rule. Now, once the priority is automatically calculated from the urgency and impact values, and the team assigns the incident or the service request to them, and they then start triaging and analyzing it, of course, they can reset the priority. That is, of course, always possible. And it's also important to emphasize that priorities are very important because priorities are used to calculate service level agreements. So in every project, every Jira service project, there are, of course, service level agreements. And as we know, service level agreements are always set by priorities. So it's just really good practice that we make sure that we have proper, correct priorities set because they determine the SLAs. And I think the best way to do that is to not ask users what they think the priority should be, but rather ask them what the urgency and the impact is and use Jira Automation to then calculate priorities. Hopefully you found this information helpful. All the best and hopefully see you on another video. Thank you very much and have a great day.